Hello, everyone, and welcome back to She Makes It Work with Gabby and Abi. Today, we are talking about authenticity, and we're specifically talking about authenticity at work. What is it, and do you need to care? Abby, what does authenticity mean to you?
Great question. To me, authenticity means bringing who you are and how you feel into any situation and honoring it. Doesn't mean you have to act on it, but really honoring it, understanding where you're coming from at any given time and showing up and not just doing the things that you think people want to see or hear from you, but doing the things that matter, doing the things in your own way, in the way that you show up.
I like that. I think authenticity is definitely showing up as your whole self and your real
Mhm.
self and being genuine. I always think that when we're connecting at work, that we can tell when someone is being genuine or not genuine. And I think that lately, authenticity has been a really powerful concept in terms of how specifically content creators are connecting with their audiences.
Mm.
So I think that is why authenticity is coming up so much more again. And I have my own personal journey with authenticity. Should I share that?
Yeah, share it with us.
Okay. So I first heard the word authenticity a little over 8 years ago when I was starting my job at my new company. So at my company that I recently worked for, authenticity was actually a core value, and it was specifically celebrating authenticity was the core value. And I really like that that was the core value and not just be authentic, because with the core value being celebrate authenticity, it really meant a couple things. One is that you needed to show up authentically, but two is that you needed to recognize authenticity in others and celebrate that with them. And I really
Mm.
loved that concept that it isn't just on you to be authentic for yourself, but also that we have the responsibility and the power to reinforce everybody else's authenticity. And I really liked that thought. And that's something that, in the 8 years I worked for that company, that I really focused on was really finding moments of authenticity with people and celebrating that and recognizing it and letting them know that I saw that they were showing up in an authentic way and that I authentically liked who they really were and helping them celebrate that.
Mm.
But it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy journey.
No, that I think that's one of the misnomers about authenticity is that it's easy or that it's just constantly positive. And that is absolutely not true. Being authentic can be very difficult, especially in situations where no one else is being authentic. I came from a company where everyone was very armored up, if you will, energetically, mentally armored up. So there wasn't room to be authentic. And so being authentic in an inauthentic space takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to say, you know what, this is who I am. This is how I'm showing up. I worked in a world that was all khakis and Patagonia jackets, and I would show up in my bright colors and my feminine outfits, and this is who I am. And you're still going to take me seriously because I still am serious. It wasn't always easy. It was easy to, kind of mold to the crowd and do what everyone else is doing or not say the thing that I think needs to be said because no one else is really doing that. No one's saying the hard thing. No one's putting themselves out there. So authenticity can be challenging. And I want everyone to realize that. And it's not this forced positivity. It's not forced anything. That's the whole thing. It's like forcing something and being authentic are mutually exclusive.
It's probably a sign. If you feel like you're forcing it, it's a sign you're not being
Exactly.
authentic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I hear, how do I want to put this? Other people in certain spaces just be authentic. And it makes me want to vomit because that is not authentically being authentic. It's not authentically inviting authenticity. It's like be authentic, but only in this way. Right. And that's
Yeah.
not authenticity either.
No, I think that's a good point, and especially since my first introduction to authenticity was in the consulting world, which is a little inauthentic to begin with, and not in a malicious way, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
consulting mask we put on, and there's a little bit of artificiality to some of the relationships. And so part of my struggle with my journey with authenticity was when I first heard this concept and this core value. I'd say my first year or two with it, I was really confused. I would just say that I would use the word confused to characterize that experience because I was coming into this from a place where I had had to be, in order to be successful in my previous role, really aggressive and a very, very hard driver and kind of a giant bee. And I would say that my first challenge with authenticity was asking myself, who am I? Genuinely, who am I? And what is my brand at work? And how can I authentically be myself and show up with that brand at work and do the work I need to be doing? And the thing I kept asking in my first year on this journey of authenticity was, well, if we're supposed to be authentically ourselves and I'm authentically a giant bee, how am I going to do this job? And I think that that's something a lot of people struggle with is they recognize that there's something in themselves that they either don't like or they're ashamed of or isn't socially acceptable. And how do they integrate their real personality when they're
Mm.
very aware that there's something about themselves where be authentic except for that. And that is
Mhm.
something I struggled with. And especially since another one of our core values was about being humble, right? And stay humble and curious. And I agreed with the staying curious, and I am a constant learner, but I'm not humble. I am really proud of my accomplishments, and I'm really proud of who I am, and I'm really confident in who I am. So, part of me learning how to be authentic and being comfortable with myself was also being comfortable with the fact that staying humble didn't look on me like I thought it should look. That should
Mm,
word
should
again,
word.
or the way I thought it looked on other people. Because, again, as a consultant, you have to show up with the confidence of what you're speaking about. So I had to learn, what does being humble look like for me? So that first year of learning to be authentic, I'd say it was a struggle. And I probably tried on, honestly, a few different personalities in that year.
Well, I love that you say that, try on personalities, because like, where do you start with authenticity, right? It's like,
Hmm.
I'm showing up as me in any moment. Well, are you? Trying things on is a really great way to find what works and what doesn't. So I love that frame. And I do that with mindsets too.
Hmm.
And I'm authentically a mindset person. So I always go back to that where if I'm having a really hard struggle, I'm struggling with something, I'm really trying to work through something, I'll try on different mindsets. It's like, okay, this is how I'm looking at it now, but if this other thing were true, what else would have to be true? And so I think you can do that with your different personalities or ways of showing up is, if I am this way, how else am I acting? What else am I doing? And I think that's a really great way to kind of try on things and say, okay, this works for me. This doesn't, I'm going to leave it. It doesn't feel right. It feels like a too tight sweater, an itchy sweater. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I can wear it, but I don't really like it. And you can kind of feel it in your body, right? I know I can. And so I love that you said that, trying things on.
Yeah, and one of the things that I learned from that was if you have these, things about yourself that are seen as negative qualities, how do you still show up authentically? And I want to reframe that as, how much of that thing can you get away with? That's where I landed. How much of that thing can I get away with? How much of being a bee can I get away with? And in what contexts?
Mm.
So that was one of my first unlocks. And I'm going to give an example. I am a giant bee and I own it. And sometimes that's a positive, and like anything else, sometimes that's a negative. And I decided that what I get to do is lean into being sassy. And so I can be authoritative. And then in other contexts, I can be fun and sassy. I can't be sassy when I'm being authoritative because that is
Mm.
terrifying to people and they don't find it humorous. But I
Mm.
get to express my kind of B side, I'll call it, in these sassy ways, even with clients. Like, clients genuinely love my authentic self. Like, I have amazing client relationships, and it's because I'm always me. And because I'm always me, they feel like they can really trust me because I'm so real, if that makes sense. Like, so when
Mm-hmm.
you're authentically yourself, people just automatically trust who you are because you have the integrity to show up as your full self all the time. And that means that integrity is going to translate into other things.
Integrity.
But I have a really funny story, and I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to say, be careful. Don't go do this yourself unless you can, but you're going to have to ask yourself, can I get away with this? This is the how much of a bee can I be getting away with, basically. So I was in a meeting, this was a couple years ago, and I was in this meeting with our team, like our internal company's team, but it was about a client project. And for whatever reason, this team was like really, really spicy about using this certain technology, which was the wrong technology. But they were just so like dialed in that they had to use this one technology. And it frankly just wasn't the right one. So I was gently trying to get them there. And I'd been trying to get them there for a few weeks. And we were in this conversation, and this architect just got a little like feisty, and he's like, we will never be using XYZ technology and I will die on this hill, right? And I'd already explained that the client strategically wanted to use this technology, that the client had invested in this technology, that it was probably not a good thing for the longevity of this person's career working with the client to be pushing against this technology, and none of that was landing. So, they're sitting there going, I will die on this hill. And I said, all right, buddy, I will see you in hell then, because we are sure as fuck going to be using this.
Okay.
And we did. But I thought it was funny, right?
That is funny. That is very funny.
I wasn't mad.
Okay, bye.
Right? But yeah, okay, bye. Mic drop, right? But I wasn't mad, but I was really kind of adamant about it. And did I get away with it? You know what I mean? Like in some ways, half the people
Did you?
I did. Half the people in the meeting thought it was funny. Half the people were probably terrified. Anyway, but that's where I'm saying use your best judgment. You still might misstep, but is it catastrophic? No, I was fine.
Come back fromable. That's what I
Yeah,
like to call it.
exactly. And so again, I was my authentic self. And that is also part of being authentic, is being aware of potential consequences of being authentic and making an intentional decision about what you're going to do with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so you might say, I'm kind of sassy too, but that's not something I would do. Great. That's not authentic to you to do that.
It's not authentically you. Right. You could try it on, see how it feels. But if it doesn't feel right, then you let it go.
Yeah, it was authentically me. And it felt good in the moment to be a little sassy. And I am going to say that if there's levels of authenticity, like if there's like a master class on authenticity, that's like right up on the edge of saying, I know this is who I am. I'm okay with the consequences of being who I am. And that takes a long time to get there. So that's part of like when I talk about the journey of authenticity, that is being at that kind of end stage of authenticity, but it took so much self-work to get there. And one of the biggest aha moments I had to unpack what was holding me back from being authentic was actually when I took our executive presence course for the first time.
Say more about that.
So in this executive presence course, one of the things that I learned, and I'll link down to the ladies who run this below because I think what they do is invaluable. Their company is called Articulate, Real and Clear, and it's about how to show up and speak. They do work with voice control. They do work with like the mental side of this. Yeah, but part of their executive presence is actually about showing up authentically, which means unlearning the bad coaching and feedback you've received early in your career. The things that have been told to you that tell you you cannot be yourself. And so what happens is that we put on masks because of all of this feedback and coaching.
Yeah.
And I want to caveat that depending on your level of your career, there are certain behaviors that are expected and acceptable, and those change. So depending on your career stage, you need to show up differently as yourself. And so learning how to be yourself at different career stages is important. But when you're in these leadership roles internally with your client, this artificiality of wearing a mask is very apparent and very jarring. And so I had learned earlier in my career not to be so direct. Not to be joking because it might not land well with certain people. That's something you learn early on as a consultant, is don't rock the boat, basically, right? But later in your career, you're expected to show up with more of a point of view.
That is definitely a mindset switch,
right?
Like from early to later in your career. That is really a thing. That is definitely a thing. Is like when you're early in your career, you're more don't rock the boat. But as a leader, you are expected to rock. That's why you're there, is to make sure that you need to rock the boat when you need to rock the boat. So that's definitely a mindset shift from, as your career trajectory changes or as progresses.
And I'll have to say that to reinforce what I learned in that executive presence course, which was to set down this artificiality, it was great because they actually do exercises with you and they'll make you say hard things. And they'll say, why are you using that tone of voice? Were you taught to soften that message? Don't do that. And that was so powerful because I'm just going to keep plugging these ladies because they're amazing. They'll actually record you and make you watch yourself. And you'll hear this artificial tone you're putting on or this thing. And I'm like, yeah, I was taught that I was like a little too direct and I had to like soften my message and I had to scale it back. And they're like, yeah, no, it looks really fake on you. And then I was working with a mentor a couple of years after that. And again, mentors, so powerful, find good ones. And every mentor I've had, even if they haven't been great, I've always been able to take away a nugget of something from them, a nugget. And the mentor told me, she's like, Gabby, you've got to stop being a people pleaser. Abby, do you think I'm a people pleaser?
No.
Do you know why?
Why?
Because by the time you met me, I did a lot of effing work. Stop being a people pleaser at work.
I was going to go
It
into
was
people
work,
pleasing because
work.
you cannot be a people pleaser and be authentic.
And do
They
you know how
are
she got
mutually
me past
exclusive.
it?
How?
She specifically said to me, "You are going to piss people off and it needs to be okay." She's like, "If I don't piss off somebody once a week, I'm not doing my job as a leader."
Mm,
And so it turned it from, hey, you're going to sometimes upset people if you show up who you are and you have to learn to be okay with it. She turned it into, it is expected. You have a big personality, you show up strong. And when you're really yourself, some people may not like it and it is okay. Not only is it okay, you're probably not being yourself if you're not upsetting somebody. It took me a while to process that. I'm not saying I woke up the next day and I'm like,
like that.
awesome, ready to
Yeah.
go. It did. It took me a while. But once I did, I was really able to embrace my full self and to set down the people
The
pleasing
expectations
tendencies.
of others. Yeah.
But then also realize that I love being of service to others. And so that is like, that can turn into people pleasing so easily.
Yeah.
But setting down the behaviors that mean I'm not myself and knowing that I can be of service better when I'm my real self. Like,
Mm,
whoa, right?
yeah.
Anyway, that was huge. So I went from who am I and how do I show up authentically when there's these things that other people don't react well to me, to being like, I'm going to be myself and it's okay if they don't react well to it or if they
Yeah.
don't enjoy that. That's
I'm going to
okay.
be okay
I'm
either
going to be
way.
okay no matter what.
Mm,
Huge.
huge. That's game changing.
Game changing.
Yeah, I've had, former people pleaser, recovering, I like to say.
You are still recovering.
Recovering people pleaser for sure.
Mm.
I once had a boss directly tell me, "Well, you're kind of a people pleaser." And I was like, "Oh my God, he can see me." Like, I just was like, "Nobody knows, it's fine." No, people know, just so you know, we can see it. And so I was like, and then I took that as a challenge. So I was like, "Well, screw you. No, I'm not." And then I'm like, "Okay, how do I not be?" Right. And it's doing the hard things of when somebody asks something of you that you're either incapable or unwilling or unable to give, you say that. And it goes back to boundaries, right? I think boundaries are what keep us in authenticity and out of people pleasing.
Yes. I think boundaries are super important.
You're
And
very good with boundaries.
so one thing I want to say is that when you're wearing a mask, people can still see what's underneath it. So just like you're saying, oh my gosh, this guy could see that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you know that, I want you to really internalize that. If you know someone can see under your mask, it's so much easier to put it down. It is not serving you. And so I just want you all out there to know, when you think you're masking and covering something, you're not. Like, people can still see something. And a lot of times they don't know what it is that they're seeing. So it's even more jarring than just being that real thing to begin with.
I love that you mentioned covering too, because we used to work at the same place and this is where I learned about the concept of covering. I was like, what is covering? And again, I'm a single mom and I was working and would have to handle things with my child or things like that. But I felt like I had to show up as if I didn't have a child. And that made it even harder. I couldn't inconvenience work with like my home stuff. It was really tough. It was really, really tough. And it led to a breakdown. I'm not going to lie. Like, I was trying to do too much. I wasn't being authentic. I was taking on, I was like, I don't have this other consideration. I didn't abandon my child. That's not what I'm saying. I took care of my child, but
She's fine. I know her. She's fine.
Can't confirm, but I felt like, that's the thing, is I felt like, so I was internalizing like, okay, I have to leave for this parent meeting, and I would go do that, but I would feel so guilty about it. And I would feel awful about it because I was like, no, I should be able to show up at work without these other things. Like, there's other childless people. I need to show up like these other childless people do. And that's not who I am. And that's not my genius. So I was hiding my genius by trying to cover for the things that made me me. Look, I am a single mom, but I can, and I hate the word but, and I can juggle a lot of different things. I may have to leave for meetings, that I will come back and I will be just as good or better if I can have the mental space to be able to deal with the things I need to deal with outside of work. And I will be able to bring my full genius, knowing that I don't have to hide anything, because the hiding is what took up my genius.
And it takes up so much cycles to do that. And then it puts you in these uncomfortable situations. But it's really interesting to me because I think of all the jobs out there and all the industries, consulting is actually the most flexible in some ways. Like, even though you have to be like with your client, on for your client,
Mhm.
so many people in the consulting world have kids and they like the flexibility of the schedule because they're doing drop off and pick up.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I've noticed working in consulting and with a lot of other companies as well is people are very comfortable setting boundaries
Mm.
around when they need to be dealing with childcare.
Right.
And that's a huge thing, is being okay accepting this about yourself and then being okay setting that boundary around, this is something I need to be doing, and then not worrying about the work that you're not doing while you're picking up your
Right.
kid and knowing you can come back to it later. So that's the boundary around the time, and it's the boundary around your attention and mental energy as well. So that's a great segue to bring it back to boundaries, right? And I do always love to talk to people about how to set boundaries at work and what's okay and how to do that effectively. And boundaries can be as simple as blocking things off on your calendar and making sure that you're taking care of your doctor's appointments and your child, which most people at work have children. They understand, right? They do. It's a very, very normal thing, and everybody gets to be okay with it. And for me, again, this is going back to people would consider me a giant bee in some ways. I am so fixated on time management. And so a lot of people in my life ask me how I'm so productive, right? Having this full-time career. And at the time I had multiple podcasts. I was writing novels. I also play video games. Like, so people ask me, well, how do you do all of that? And I'm like, well, I am really fussy about my time management. And I set a lot of boundaries around my time. And one of those, including being incredibly productive at work in my day job, is being really spicy about meeting times. They start on time and they end on time. And to me, that is a specific and firm boundary I have. And every single person I work with will do an initial meeting, a boot up, or just working styles, even individually. And I'm very open and I say I am really fanatic about time management. My meetings start on time and they end on time. I think it's respectful to other people, but it's also the only way I can do all the things that I'm doing at once.
Yeah.
And so this is something I need. So in meetings, again, I tell everybody I work with that I work this way, and they still are a little surprised in the first few meetings with me, because I will literally hang up a meeting when it's time. Not when it's done, but when it's time.
Yeah.
And again, I'm great at facilitating meetings and keeping meetings on track. And even with all of that, there's still going to be people who show up late and who then want to make the meeting run late because they were late. And then they'll like ramble, even if I'm trying to keep them on track. That's all fine. Again, I'm amazing at managing that, and it's still going to happen. That's totally fine. You just have to accept that. But part of me accepting it is still hanging up the meeting when it's time. And a lot of times, if they're still talking, I won't interrupt them, but I'll wave and hang up. Or if, there's a lull in the conversation and I can tell they want to keep going, I'll be like, okay, bye. And I hang up. Or if, again, they're rambling and not looking at camera for some reason, I'll put in chat, have a hard stop, gotta go. And if it's with a client and I know they're a rambler, I know this is a risk, sometimes I'll remind people at the beginning of the meeting, I'll just say, I have a hard stop at 11. So just so you know, I'm going to be hanging up at 11. And everybody accepts that. And I see a lot of executives doing that. So you'll notice that when you're in executive meetings or you're working with one-on-one or in a steerco or something, they'll come on and they'll be like, hey, just so you know, I've got a hard stop. And it's so casual. It's that quiet confidence again, right?
Yeah.
So they'll be so casual about it. But everybody knows this about me, and I will end the meeting and hang up. And when you first work with me, sometimes you're shocked if you come from an environment where people say that, but their meetings run long, or 5 minutes is okay. And I'm like, 5 minutes is not okay. 5 minutes is huge.
There's a lot of churn. Yeah.
But again, that's where authenticity requires knowing yourself, being okay with yourself, and being able to articulate your boundaries. Don't just set your boundaries, but articulate them. This is a
Right.
boundary for me,
Being
and I
clear.
will enforce this boundary. I will hang up this call.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
mean,
being clear,
but it's
right?
going to happen.
Clarity is kindness. We've said this before, and being clear about your boundaries. I think it's very important for especially women, but everyone in the workplace, to be authentic and articulate that authenticity, because that also gives room for everyone else to do the same. There's that social proof. If one person does it, it gives everyone else permission to do the same. And I think if you show up authentically, you're making it a safer space for other people to do the same. And I think that's how we grow. And that's how we all get better as a society, as a workplace in general, is we all start showing up as our true selves and holding those boundaries that we need to keep ourselves safe and productive. Sometimes it starts with the first person.
I'd say that's how you build a culture, and
Yeah.
that's how you maintain a culture. So like I mentioned, celebrate authenticity was a core value at the company I was working at. I did notice that as we grew and grew and grew, we were losing a little bit of that. And I had made a conscious decision that I'm going to continue to be the standard bearer for certain values. And that was one that was obviously near and dear to my heart. I had done so much work to reach this point of authenticity. And in order to foster an environment of psychological safety, it was really important that that culture continued, because if it didn't, I would have to scale it back. And as a leader, it was so important for me to provide to others what I had learned and what I had gained from that as well. So I had an opportunity a few years ago to build out a new practice and build out a new team and hire a bunch of people. And so this is why this one's really meaningful to me when you talk about modeling authenticity.
Yeah.
And I built out this new team, and I made sure that I hired a very diverse team in all ways as much as possible. So both race, culture, gender, but also on top of that, also personality. And I had hired a couple of what outside, might be considered a little bit of weirdos. I'm a little bit of a weirdo. And I wanted to make sure that as long as people had the skills and the will and the drive to do the job, that even though this was a consulting world, you get to have a little bit of flavor. You get to bring in a little bit of your own spice and your authentic self into this. And it was really rewarding to me, because about a year later, one of the people I hired came to me and he specifically said, "Gabby, it has meant so much to me that you always show up as yourself, because it really showed me that I could be myself, and that you are so authentically you. It really helped me feel comfortable and safe knowing that it's not just talk, and that I could be my authentic self too." And I heard this from a couple of the people on my team, and that meant the world to me.
Yeah. Psychological safety is one of my favorite things to talk about in teams, because without that, you cannot innovate. It doesn't exist, because innovation requires risk of failure. And if you're scared to fail, you don't have that psychological safety to fail, you're not going to risk. And so, and even risk being yourself, even risk, anything, being yourself,
Taking any
trying,
risks, requires safety.
something new that might or might not work, but if it does, it's a big payoff, that kind of thing. So yeah, exactly. Showing up authentically provides that psychological safety for everyone around you to do the same, to show up and do their best, bring their unique genius to the table.
Bring their unique genius and feel comfortable being their whole self. Because one of the things that we learned in that covering series that you mentioned is that if you think about how much mental and emotional cycles are consumed by covering and by masking.
So much.
So much.
So much.
And if you're worried about picking up your child from childcare, and then while you're doing it, you're worried about all this stuff you're missing and the toll it takes on you emotionally, that is all subtracting from your ability to show up as your whole self and to be fully present in whatever moment you're in.
Yes.
Fully present with your child when you're with your child,
Right.
and fully present at work when you're at work, and not feel like some of those cycles are taken up by worrying about, how am I going to exit this meeting so I can pick up my child without people knowing that's what I need to be doing. It's really, it's a distraction to have to cover and to mask. And it's so freeing to know how to be your full self. And again, it's not something you decide, tomorrow I'm going to be authentic, and then you're going to do it perfectly. You need to try some things on. You need to make some missteps, but it requires digging deep into knowing who you are. And then when you talk about, or when we talk about branding yourself at work, because part of it is branding your authentic self at work, taking that authentic self and turning it into something that is in your brand. We'll talk about this more when we do our, personal brand at work series. Really what that means is, what are the things you want to highlight about yourself to create your brand? And one of the things I like to highlight about myself is, I'm an authentic person. I'm a person with boundaries. That is part of my brand. People know that about me.
That is something everyone knows about. Whoever knows you knows that about you.
And honestly, they respect it. Even people who
have to.
may not like me respect that
you don't
about
have to like
me.
it, but you have to respect it.
Yes. And so I just want everybody to know that there's not just freedom in being your authentic self, there's power in being your authentic self.
Yes.
And be able to craft your brand story around what you've discovered about your own authenticity.
Great point.
Does that resonate?
It does.
Yeah.
It really does. I love that you turned it into power.
It's power.
Because it's all, and then it becomes a choice. right? You're
Yep.
choosing, and the power's always in the choice. That's one of my
Mm-hmm.
favorite sayings, is the power's always in the choice. And so when you choose to show up authentically, it is inherently powerful.
And I hope that telling that story helps alleviate fears for people, because you might be afraid, well, how is this going to land with my stakeholders or my clients or with my executives or whoever it is that you're interfacing with that has some sort of authority over you. And I just love to share my story, because part of that story is it lands well. They resonate with it. They react to it. There's a comfort and a trust in knowing that you're always real. And so with my clients, that translates into, they know I'm not going to sell them something they don't need, because they know that's not authentically me. They know I genuinely care about them, because when I show up with my authenticity, they can tell that it's coming from a place of caring and a place of genuine service to them. And so when you find out what your brand is and you know who you are, just know that that's going to resonate with people. And it's just like when people are starting social media careers, for example, everybody says, find your niche and be yourself, because your audience will find you and it will resonate with them. So what we're talking about is translatable to anything that you're doing with people. And you will only be truly successful when you know who you are and you're okay with who you are and you know how to show up as that. The right people will resonate with it.
Absolutely. I actually recently read the stat that there was a question of like, what's the most powerful human emotion? And people think love. That's a very, very powerful one. However, the most powerful human emotion is authenticity. It is 400 times stronger than love. So even if you're not saying something somebody likes, if you're authentically saying it, it is powerful. So authenticity is literally the most powerful human emotion known to humans.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's true, because even in my world, I'd say that there are so many people who respect me, and it doesn't matter if they like me or not. Like client executives, like they all respect what I'm telling them. And that's actually what matters, is authenticity gives respect and trust. And that matters more than being liked. So don't worry that people aren't going to like you if you're authentic self. It doesn't actually matter. Right? Because authenticity is more powerful than
It's
love.
more powerful.
And it's certainly more powerful than like.
Ooh, facts, mic drop.
Yeah. So I'd say don't worry so much about likability. Focus on authenticity. The right people will resonate with it, and nobody else actually matters.
This is a great chat. I hope we get a lot of questions about this. So if you have questions about how to show up, what really is it? What isn't it? Right? Let's engage in a dialogue about this. I feel like there's more here to talk about. And so definitely invite your comments, your thoughts, experiences on when you've been authentic, when you haven't. Like, engage with us on this. I feel like there's like a whole community chat we could have about this.
I think so too. And I also think one of our next topics on this needs to be authenticity and vulnerability, because I think there's just some confusion about vulnerability in a professional setting, and what does that have to do with authenticity. And I think that's a good topic. I think getting into branding is good. And then again, those are our thoughts. And like Abby said, I'd love to hear what y'all want to hear more about and what's resonating and what's not. Because yeah, it's been a journey. I'd say my journey with authenticity wasn't necessarily the full 8 years, but it was about 6.5.
Oh, wow.
So, but again, that's to get to what I consider to be the peak of authenticity, and every step you take is valuable.
All right.
All right. Thank you all so much. This has been She Makes It Work with Gabby and Abby. So glad to have you here with us on this journey.
And if you're on a podcast, Spotify, Apple, where all the podcasts are, give us a 5-star rating. It really helps our show grow and other people to find it.
That's right. Thank you all so much.
Okay,
thanks.
bye.
Bye.